My guest today is Andrew McKenna. Andrew, welcome to the show.
Pleasure, Dean. Thank you.
You got my attention. From federal prosecutor to federal inmate.
Yes.
I got to hear this one. Let's go back to the beginning.
Sure.
Tell me how it was growing up.
Well, I grew up here in Schenectady, and, by all means, I had a fairly normal childhood. There weren't any real abuse issues or trauma issues. The youngest of four, my parents were together, and but I noticed at a very young age that I never really felt completely comfortable in my own skin. And, fear, anxiety, depression, although we weren't really identifying depression as much then. But I kind of kept it to myself and, acted out in minor ways as a kid. But I noticed that around 12, 13, 14, that anxiety that I had in middle school going into high school would go away if I drank a little bit of beer or Jack Daniels and, smoked some weed. And so those feelings would go away. The pitfall there is I never learned those coping skills that you have to learn to realize what's going on in your head isn't necessarily true.
Right.
So, a lot of negative self-talk. And the odd thing was, outwardly, as I said, I was an athlete. I did well in school. I had...
So good grades, played sports.
Grades were okay. They weren't great. I was kind of bored by school. I probably would have benefited from a Montessori type environment. Public schools, very good schools, Zoller, Oneida, Linton. But yeah, outwardly I was somewhat popular. I had plenty of friends, so I should have been fine, but inside my head I wasn't super fine. So, not developing those coping skills, taking that into my 20s now, and, leaving school in the 11th grade, joining the military, getting my GED, stationed out in Hawaii.
What branch of service?
First the Air Force, and later I went into the Marines as an officer.
And thank you for your service.
You're welcome. Thank you for saying that. But I was living the life out. I was stationed out in Hawaii. 18-year-old kid. We weren't doing drugs because we were getting drug tested.
Right.
But we could drink as much as we wanted.
That'll stop people from doing drugs. We'll just drug test everybody.
Right. And if you fail, you're going to the brig. You're going to jail. So, but certainly booze was cheap. On military bases, I'm sure it's still the case. It was half of what it would cost out on the civilian side. But again, I did well in the Air Force. I did one tour, decided to move on. I went to school, got my undergraduate, moved back here to the Albany area, finished up at SUNY, political science, minor in psychology. And my friends who are engineers joke with me that I took the easy way out with political science, but that's what I was interested in. And then a big change occurred in my life. So I graduate college, and I don't know what to do with my life. And so my oldest brother, who had graduated a couple of years earlier from Albany Law School, he said, well, if you go to law school, you're locked in for 3 years. You don't have to think about your life. You have your plan. And that was perfect for my mind because I didn't want to have to think of and worry and have anxiety.
We'll follow up in 3 years.
Yeah, exactly. We'll revisit this in 3 years. And sure enough, 3 years goes by, and I'm partying in law school, but not super, super hard. I never went on any kind of runs.
Right.
Did fairly well. But at the end of the 3 years, I'm like, well, now what am I going to do? So I talked to my oldest brother again, and my first older brother, not an attorney, but just a brilliant guy and always gives great life advice. They both really do, and my sister as well. He says, well, why don't you join the Marines? And I'm like, join the Marines? He said, yeah. I said, this one-star general, retired. He could talk to you about it. And sure enough, I met with General King, who happened to be formerly the highest-ranking lawyer in the Marine Corps.
Wow.
Yeah, and this was around the time that what is that Tom Cruise movie where Nicholson says you can't handle the truth, whatever that movie was.
A Few Good Men.
A Few Good Men. So it's right around that time. So now I'm intrigued. I'm like, wow, this is kind of
you
cool.
might end up in a movie.
Yeah, like Tom Cruise, or Kevin Bacon. And that's how fickle my brain is. I see that and it's like glittery. So, but I looked into it, and the fact was that I would get trial work immediately, and that was really what I wanted to be, was a good trial attorney.
Right.
So I joined the Marine Corps as an officer. Best time of my life. The training itself was amazing. Officer candidate school down at Quantico, 10 weeks, just grueling physically, but also mentally, because they're trying to weed out people that can't lead.
Right.
And so what they'll do is they'll give you like 15 tasks. You're in charge, McKenna. And they'll sit there with a clipboard, and as soon as you start to get a handle on things, they'll give you more stuff. So we had a huge washout rate of almost like 40%. By the grace of God, I made it through it. I just stayed off people's radar for the most part. It's kind of the story of my life until, but I got trial work. I left the Marine Corps after a tour and got my dream job with the Justice Department as a prosecutor.
Wow.
And, young guys from Albany, New York, typically don't get picked up by the Justice Department, so I was very fortunate. It's all Harvard, Yale, Duke,
wow.
Chicago. They're coveted jobs. Great work if you can get it, kind of thing. But I performed well, and I worked super, super hard. I probably had to work harder than the next guy because they're just naturally smart, or I don't know what it was. Great experience. Now, just going back a little ways, where did my addiction start? Well, we know it started when I was a kid. And I kind of carried that through into my adulthood. Again, searching for that escape, that no feel, no deal. And I had hurt my back in the Marine Corps during training exercise.
I know where this is heading.
You know it. And it's textbook, right?
Yep.
And it's just my friend who sees me speaking, across the country. He said, "This is the perfect storm for you.
Mm-hmm.
This timing for you to come in and try to, spread the message of, experience and strength and hope. This is so. Anyhow, I grin and bear it for a couple of years in the Marine Corps because a broken Marine, they're going to send you home.
Oh yeah.
And I always say that I understand that, and it's mission first and that kind of thing. Unfortunately, now we have 66,000 veterans that are opioid dependent or addicted. But back then, you weren't getting anything. So I grin and bear it. And you know what, Dean? I treat it exactly how it should have been. Heating pads, ice packs, over-the-counter Motrin. I had a little L4, L5 shake up in the back. I get out, and when I get to the Justice Department, I go to a doctor in Washington, D.C., where I lived and worked. And he's intrigued by my job because I'm traveling the country and all over the place prosecuting these drug cases in cartels and money laundering. Ironically enough, but he's intrigued by it, and so I go in, I put on weight, traveling, eating hotel foods, you know how it is, and my back started to act up. Now, I should have treated it with Motrin, heating pads, and ice packs, but I went to the doctor, and he prescribed me 100 Percocet.
Have I got something for you?
10 milligrams. We got to treat the pain. That's what he said. No MRI, no X-ray. No, I don't even think there was like a physical exam, but he wasn't like a pill mill doctor. He was a legitimate doctor, but I think he came up in a time where Big Pharma was convincing doctors that these things weren't really, addictive, which is nonsense. But they've spent hundreds of millions of dollars convincing doctors that they're okay, that fewer than 2% of their patients are going to become addicted. And we just know that's not the case. So immediately, and in your treatment facilities, opioids, it's the no feel, no deal drug.
Yep.
So it's the perfect thing to shut down what's going up here.
We'll take care of your back and your head.
That's it, and so it was the perfect fit for me and the absolute worst fit for me. So I start taking those not as directed. I'm traveling all over. I'll get back to DC, call my doctor. Oh, I left my script in California or left my script in Chicago. No problem, Andrew. I'll send you in a new one. You can go pick it up in a few minutes here. Sure enough, I just kept, So that was Percocet, Oxycontin. I ended up leaving the Justice Department, and I write about this in my book, Sheer Madness, under not good terms. Okay, there was some misconduct on my part, and I could have compromised a massive investigation based on something that I did, and they said, "You got to go. You know, there was really no real offer of treatment. You know, it was just like, look, why don't you just go quietly off into the sunset? So I moved up to New York, married with 2 little kids at the time, 3 and 2, or maybe 2 and 1.5 at that point. You know, nice little house in Del Mar, got a good job at a good firm in Albany, and, you know, call around trying to find a doctor to prescribe Percocet, and they just put up roadblocks.
Yeah.
You know, New York had gotten out ahead of this, at least we thought, to limit prescribing. And I mean, I had doctors hang up on me. I had doctors say, don't call here anymore. You know, I'm not, you know, like one guy gave me 10 hydrocodone or something. And so I called for a refill because you're not getting a refill. So really hardline stuff. And this is Percocet, so it's oxycodone. So when I would run out, the withdrawal symptoms are, you know, they're pretty bad. You feel like you have a cold. You feel crappy for, like, you know, a couple of days, but you can get through it, you know. But when the Percocet ran out and I couldn't find a doctor up here, I called an old friend, and he said the magic words. He said, well, I can get Oxycontin.
Oh, our friends from Purdue.
Purdue Pharma, right. And so I was on Fox and Friends not too long ago debating Dr. Keith Abloh. The FDA, remember they had approved sending 12-year-olds home with the bottles?
What could happen?
Right. I mean, and it was funny because Keith Abloh, he's a psychiatrist, and he really attacked me on the little 6-minute debate we had on a Sunday morning. And he said, well, Attorney McKenna, he said, isn't it true that you committed crimes by buying heroin? And it was almost like the perfect moment because I was able to say, yeah, doc, I wrote a book about it. I'm not trying to hide it. You know, so it was like a shameless plug.
Yeah.
And it had some relevance. But anyway, so my friend, I know at the time I knew of Oxycontin. It was called, an offensive term, hillbilly heroin.
Yeah.
Because you remember Appalachia.
Yep.
West Virginia, they were crushing it when Purdue first put it on the market, injecting it and dying.
They had the whole Oxycontin Express.
Exactly.
Yep.
That's right. And so immediately I'm intrigued and a little bit nervous because I know how powerful this stuff can be. And I end up starting taking 80 milligram Oxycontin. You know, with my ontology, I ended up taking like 4 or 5 a day of the big 80s. You know, I'm working a good job. I'm performing still at a pretty high level.
Sounds like you're functional.
I was functional. And unfortunately for us in long-term recovery, we understand that that's just an illusion, right? It's a house of cards.
Yep.
And it's coming down.
Oh, yeah.
You know, and it's just somebody sitting there with a stopwatch just watching.
Those are the old not yet.
Yeah, exactly. And so the Oxycontin's run out. And his dealer got pinched or whatever. And so I remember this distinctly to this day. I was sitting in my law office in Albany, and my stomach started flipping, and I started sweating profusely, super, super nauseous. Body started tightening up, and it came on fast, Dean. And I kind of went into a panic. And so I knew I hadn't taken an Oxy in like a day and a half, never had experienced withdrawals before. So called my friend. And he says, well, there is something that I can get for you. And there was a long pause on the phone, and we went back and forth. And I knew that we both probably used our last Oxy right around the same time. And he wasn't really nervous, or he wasn't really going through withdrawals. Anyhow, long story short, I start doing heroin. Because Oxycontin to me is heroin in a pill. And once the Oxys ran out, as I said, I turned to heroin and then forget it. The house of cards came down, became despondent, lost custody of my children, repeated losses in family court, I mean, couldn't even see my children, became so despondent and depressed. I checked myself into the psychiatric ward at Albany Med. Number one, I had nowhere to go. I'd burned enough bridges where nobody was going to allow me into their house. And, you know, to protect themselves and their belongings, and, you know, they were fed up. Family was fed up, and you know how that's part of the disease. And it's interesting looking back now, after a lot of therapy and a lot of, I was at Conifer and Troy, outpatient. Lisa Beckett and those folks pretty much saved my life. But before I got there, I ended up going on a crime spree. And had lost my job, as I said, driving up to family court one day, and I drive north and I go to Lake George and I rob a bank. I go in.
Hold on.
Yeah.
So you go from federal prosecutor
Right.
to heroin addict
Yeah.
to bank robber.
Yes. Yes. I knew, even though I'd put some clean time together, it wasn't going to be enough for the judge.
Right.
I relapsed. I used. And going to court, I knew I had to take a urine screen. You know, and back then, I blamed everybody but myself.
Oh, of course. It's somebody else's fault.
Right. It's the judge's fault. It's my ex-wife's fault.
Yep.
It's the system's fault. It's everybody's fault. You know, now, clearly, I realize that I'm responsible. Addicted people or people in long-term recovery, we're responsible for our actions. Now, I understand the compulsion stage of addiction,
Sure,
where you kind of lose your free will, right? But it's not a moral failing. You know, it's just the chemical changes in your brain and your body, and it's a disease. So instead of going to family court, I drove north and robbed the bank, and then in the next 6 or 7 weeks, I robbed 5 more, a couple of grocery stores. I mean, I was just, you know,
Wow.
I was off the charts, you know.
Was that the bottom?
That led to the bottom of having to look at my girlfriend's face when she came to Albany County Jail after my arrest. It was right after we didn't even try to do a bail hearing. You know, clearly bank robbers don't get bail. I mean, we tried, so I sat in Albany County Jail. So the bottom was having to see the look of disappointment on her face.
Yeah.
So I'm in Albany County Jail. I'm like, wow, I got to get out of here. You know, this is terrible. You know, and this is, I think it was probably prior to Sheriff Craig Apple taking over the jail. And it was just, in my view, it was a hellhole. Now, jail's not supposed to be a fun place anyhow. But I literally withdrew for 7 or 8 days on the floor of the medical unit. You know, no comfort meds like we use at our treatment facilities if necessary.
Yeah.
You know, no Suboxone, no methadone, nothing, right? So during that 7-day period, that was hell, you know, where I'm throwing up, I'm defecating, urinating, you know, falling asleep, waking up, you know, really wanting to die at that point because it was just the withdrawals were so vicious. And of course, I was at that point, I was probably using, I don't know, 60 or 70 bags of heroin a day.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, my habit was high, you know, for sure. But anyways, they put me in general population, and I keep calling my attorney, Gene Promomo, who's a great criminal defense attorney, works at the Federal Defender's Office in Albany. And he's like, look, we got to get bail. We got to figure this out. And he goes, you're not really going to get bail, but if you want to try, I will continue to try. So we went back to Judge Randolph Therese, who was a magistrate judge in federal court in Albany. But this time we went back with a plan. I had 6 or 7 months clean in the jail. You know, serving that time. You know, the federal case was pending still. We hadn't pled. So anyhow, I get an appointment with Conifer. Funny conversation from my counselor's office at the jail with Lisa Beckett, who was the leader of Conifer. And the conversation went something like, she says, well, you're in jail, but you're calling for me to do an assessment. You want to come to the office and do an assessment. And of course, she's thinking, this guy's not getting bail, right? And it's been in the newspapers and on the news, so some people in our field were following it, I'm sure. So she says something to the effect like, well, I'll pencil you in, you know, as if you're really going to get bail. But then I got together with a psychologist. She wrote an evaluation, a report to the court. I arranged through family, and my love, Dawn, was instrumental in arranging for the ankle bracelet, ankle monitoring, and all these things, little cash bail package we put together. And Judge Therese gave me bail, and I got out. And I started immediately at Conifer in their intensive outpatient program, probably 4 groups a day, 4 groups a week, an individual a week. And it was my chance to embrace recovery, because at that point, I just didn't want to go back.
Right.
You know, ultimately, I ended up doing 65 months in federal prison. That was my sentence. I didn't have a weapon. Saw probably the most violent acts I could imagine in prison while I was there. You know, there's no really such thing as club fed, you know, because if bank robbery is considered a violent crime under the statute, and so there's no going to a camp where you have freedom. You know, you're going to legitimate prison. But while I was there, I journaled, and this is what I recommend to clients that I get into treatment all the time. Start journaling. You know, get these thoughts out of your head. A lot of these negative thoughts, most of them aren't real. And so as I'm writing this stuff and giving this advice, it sort of sinks into me that this, you know, I acted in a manner inconsistent with my value system. And we all have a value system. And when I'm working with clients, I say, well, all right, let's sit down and define what this is. And I'm not talking law clients. I'm talking like people who are just seeking treatment. Mm-hmm. That's what I do now with addiction campuses. And you know, so that journaling process that occurred in prison ultimately turned into a book. You know, it's not about bank robberies. It's not about crimes. It's not about any of those things. It's about my story growing up and, you know, falling from grace, if you want to call it grace, you know, as Paul Grundle from the Times-Union, who's now the director of the Writers Institute for New York State, amazing job, amazing writer and guy, a friend of mine now. He reviewed the book a couple of years ago when I you know, brought it out, and it's this great line, you know, heroin doesn't read resumes, you know, and it really doesn't, you know. Or it could apply to anything. Addiction doesn't read resumes. You know, not that I had this great highfalutin resume, but you know it
is what it is. From federal prosecutor to federal inmate.
Yeah,
that's not a headline you see in the Times-Union.
Right. No, absolutely. You know, but that whole perception of an addicted person living under a bridge, shooting up dirty needles,
pushing a grocery cart, brown paper bag.
Right. That's not. I mean,
going to the bathroom on themselves.
Right. You know. And we still see that,
sure.
You know, but now, you know, now it's changed.
Soccer mom,
police
officer.
Yep, absolutely. And a lot of the people that I work with are first responders. You know, heavy trauma.
Yeah.
I have a friend who's a police officer in Massachusetts, and I believe he had to Narcan somebody 6 times. In one episode of an overdose, just to bring him back. And I think the kid was like 17.
Wow.
You know, which is, you know, the population that you help.
Yep. Well, Andrew, and I think, and I've come to the conclusion, and I think sometimes, you know, people outside of our field are a little disconnected, sometimes more so than others. And I've just started explaining it, and as a person in long-term recovery myself, personally and professionally, I do believe that behind every use is pain. Now, it could be physical pain if we're talking about opiates, or trauma.
Yeah.
Sexual abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse.
Yep.
You know, no one says, "Hey, when I grow up, I want to be an addict."
That's right.
Hey, I'm going to law school. Maybe someday I'll go to federal prison.
Yeah. No, that's exactly right.
That'd make a great book.
Right.
I just got to get through it.
I heard it's a pretty good book.
Yeah.
That's absolutely spot on. You know, that's, you know, and as I explained to different people, you know, this isn't a moral failing. You know, we're responsible as addicted people to seek help. And when I talk to schools and different organizations and corporations across the country, I tell them, I say, look at how you're living your life. If you have an issue, ask for help.
Yeah.
You know, I work with a lot of lawyers. Well, they don't want to leave their firm to go do a 30-day or 60-day residential program, right? Well, what's the consequence if you don't go? You know, and then there's all sorts of protections now for people who are suffering from addictions where they're allowed to go to treatment,
right? And
they can't be terminated for it. You know, certain circumstances, moral turpitude.
Andrew, on another side, can we talk about and I'm kind of putting you on the spot, as a former federal prosecutor, can we talk about the way criminal justice addresses substance use disorders?
Absolutely. And fortunately, when we talk about alternatives to incarceration for the addicted, I'm starting to see a sea change. I work with judges and district attorneys, and you know, I know that you get involved as well. But it doesn't make any sense to just warehouse an addicted person in any sort of environment without giving them treatment.
Yeah.
Right? And if you're conservative and you say, well, this person got themselves into the problem in the first place, well, if you're, if you're fiscally conservative, then just think of what we're spending as taxpayers for this revolving door. So that's the counter argument.
$65,000 a year per inmate. Yeah.
Right.
We need
recidivism rate of 65% and 45% in the state.
We need help, not handcuffs.
Exactly. So I was very encouraged this morning. I spoke to a graduating class of the drug court in Albany, Judge Connolly's court, 35 graduating members.
That's great.
Yeah, between 7 months and 20 months of clean time.
Wow.
And you just look at their eyes, and they're cleaned up. They're feeling better about themselves, and it's probably one of the happiest days of their lives not to be in the drug court system anymore, because it's rigorous.
Yeah, it's not easy.
No, but it gives people the opportunity to embrace recovery, as opposed to just going and sitting in a jail cell, 3 hots and a cot. So I am encouraged by that. We need to see more of it. I think judges and district attorneys, especially with district attorneys, this isn't about wins and losses. This isn't W's and L's. I learned that as a prosecutor with the Justice Department. You have to come at it with a sense of judgment, a sense of justice, and ultimately, it gives that addicted person the opportunity to embrace recovery and then pass it on. That as being in the field and being in recovery yourself. So now you're like, it's like this butterfly effect. You help one guy or one gal, and then they're going to pass it on, whether it's a 12-step program or some other type of recovery program. But it's encouraging. I'm encouraged by it.
Yeah. So, Sheer Madness.
Yes.
How can somebody get that book?
BarnesandNoble.com and also Amazon.com. And they can order it. And I do book signings, and I typically bring books with me when I do my speaking engagements. And so I'm happy to sign books.
And how can somebody reach out to you personally?
Well, for me, I'll give you my phone number.
Okay.
And it's my direct line. So if somebody needs to get into treatment or has a loved one, call 518-269-8306. And I'll work directly with families. I get people placed with insurance, without insurance.
Great.
And it's addiction campuses. It's premier treatment, and nobody has to take a second mortgage out. We're not in the industry to make money. We're in the industry to help people.
Yeah. Andrew, thank you so much.
My pleasure. My pleasure, Dean.